podcast of Web Trends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. Web Trends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. In this episode, we talk to Chris Simmance, co-founder of SERPsketch. Chris has spent the last 8 years in digital marketing and has an impressive background in SEO in particular. The past 7 years have been dedicated to building a series of businesses and developing a reputation as an acclaimed keynote speaker. Chris is one of a kind with his deep knowledge on SEO and his familiar and friendly tone of voice, which all makes for a very interesting discussion. Chris, your LinkedIn profile says you wear lots of hats.
Yeah.
Tell me what other things you do other than working at SERPsketch.
I thought I'd have to change my LinkedIn profile to say that because I kept updating it to say multiple different things. I thought it just sounded a little bit silly. So I run a digital agency focusing on SEO and PPC and have done for the last 7 years. But I also work in a few different startups in different roles. One being a leisure industry booking system and website business. Another being a science of influence and persuasion, training and consultancy company. And finally, SERPsketch, which is where we got to talking.
It's interesting because they always say, if you want something done, ask a busy man. It seems like you're incredibly busy. So do you get much done? Do you have much conflict? Are you constantly balancing your kind of demands?
Yes and no. I have a really good routine of up at 5, get as much of the doing bits done, as in all the to-do list stuff, as possible. And then that leaves the majority of the kind of average working day to do calls, meetings, conversations and things, the stuff you can't necessarily prepare for. And then I find that towards the end of a day, it's then, I don't know the best way of putting it, but I call it my mop-up time. Like it's all the things I missed through the day or things that got added to the to-do list from other calls and that sort of stuff. And if I stick as rigidly to that as possible, then it kind of works. I'm trying to, not in such an egotistical way to say I am like this guy. I try and model myself around Elon Musk's approach to time and using the time blocking method. So I basically break time down into little blocks, but have sort of those blocks sort of thematically throughout the day, like the mop up time at the end of the day. Otherwise, I'll never get anything done. And then you get that kind of task list paralysis, I like to call it.
Moving towards the SEO part of your business, and I know that represents quite a large proportion. For many marketers, SEO is an ongoing challenge, and some have even described it as a dark art, as the rules seem to always be changing, and there's never a constant. So how do you see SEO and the complications that people may perceive in it?
This is really interesting, and depending on whoever it is that's listening right now, they'll either completely agree or completely disagree, and very likely nothing in between. Right. There really isn't a perfect way of answering this, because SEO, it's not a dark art per se. I like to think of it as a bit of a blend between an art and a science. And the art being the marketing aspect, where you're actually trying to put yourself into the mind of the user or the buyer or the client and make sure that a website literally suits those needs as best as possible with the content, the structure and things like that. And then the science being the technical aspect, which is effectively, from an SEO perspective, website quality assurance, really, making it as quick and as easy to use as possible, and therefore also that then sort of follows for a robot. So I can understand why people would, outside of SEO or who don't know it very well, would think it was a dark art, primarily because there's a lot of kind of how-tos, but when you're looking at most industries, even some of the newer ones, there is kind of a this is how you do it kind of checklist, if that makes sense. And with SEO, there isn't a one size fits all. And there's a kind of running joke in SEO that the answer to every question is it depends.
Yeah.
And that's because it really does. Like with your tool, you guys will probably have clients that will make one change that works really well for them, but in a totally different industry, that same change won't suit anyone else. So it always does depend on lots of different factors. And then when you take into account that Google, this omnipresent thing, that there isn't anyone who knows the algorithm in its entirety, and there isn't anyone who works on the entire thing in one go. So you often see people who are well known who work in Google saying things which are confirming one thing or denying another thing, and then someone else will say something that maybe contradicts that in a year or two's time. So it's an industry of confusion, and I think that if you look at it as it's a marketing method with the scientific side of looking at data and understanding what the heck's going on, and then making informed decisions about what to do with the art later.
That's a pretty comprehensive answer. I'm still, in my own mind, I think that SEO has been predominantly about keywords in the past number of years, certainly when I was very, very engaged with it. That seems to potentially have changed. And from what I see, SEO, PR, social outreach, share of voice, they're all kind of melding into a kind of you've got to do more all the way around to be able to get better quality of inbound leads if you're in B2B, or inbound inquiries, or whatever it might be. Would that be the case?
Yes, it's really interesting to say that, because all the while people are searching for things with words, or in the search engine, typing in words or speaking words now more. There is always going to be a focus on the specific words that actually are what people are looking for. I think because the way Google's changed in the last few years, it's less about the words now and more about the intent behind the words, the person asking those words, and making sure that the page that they're presented with within the results answers their question as fully and completely and as quickly as possible.
So that, just let me interrupt, because I think that's really interesting. You saying it depending upon who's asking the question, with regard to what answers they're going to get. Could you just elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, so the who question is around the sort of the personalization side of things. So if you're, let's just say, for example, if you're in the city of London, in one of the office kind of sections of the city, you're in an office block, and you're searching for something, and you're continually on your machine using your browser doing things related to your work, and then you search for something, you're likely to see something which is personalized to you, either by your location or your search history, or what you've looked at in the past that's worked. If you're then a mum in an office in a small town somewhere, you might see a very similar but different set of results that are personalised to you. The personalisation in that sense doesn't swing enormously, but there is a personalisation element there, not just location, but also what you've searched for in the past, and therefore what the search engine thinks might suit you better. And the other layer to that is the intent. And that's quite important, because you might actually be searching for the same thing, but you're looking for maybe something different at that time. So there's that unknown knowledge style point where you have a pain, but you're not sure that there's a solution to it. You might be searching for something at that point, but actually not knowing that there's a way to solve that problem, and just be looking for, I don't know, an article or something that helps you. And then you might search for that exact same phrase later on and be presented with a page that suits the stage you're at, which is to then buy or to convert or to become a lead for someone.
So from sitting in the chair of a marketer,
Mm.
that would seem to add a whole different dimension of you can't make one size fit all, or even five sizes fit five. You've got
Yeah.
to think of maybe hundreds of
Yeah.
kind of different computations to be able to try and realize the best bang for your buck when
Yeah.
investing in SEO.
Yeah, and again, that's why the answer usually is it depends, and it's always what lens are you looking under at that point. And one of the things with SEO is that 5-6 years ago, one person could do most of the SEO for an average sized business's website.
Hmm.
Now you need someone who's much better versed on data and understanding what the meaning of the data is, rather than green line goes up is good. You also need someone who understands the intent of the user at that certain point in order to write the right content for that type of page. You then need effectively from a technical perspective, you need someone who actually understands how robots crawl websites and how browsers work and things like that. So that's the job of at the very least 3 or 4 people at that point. And um, you then get to that point where if you don't sort of manage that properly, you can have data overload or information overload, and that's when you kind of the website might stagnate and only suit the very end of the funnel or the very beginning of the funnel, for example.
With the number of channels within channels, and by that I mean you use a search engine results page and you see ads, you see shopping, you see some questions, you see Wikipedia and a number of other things.
Mm.
How can a marketer make head nor tail of that now?
Yeah, it doesn't help but that Google takes away a lot of the information that it used to provide and used to share. So back in I think it was 2012, Google removed the from Google Analytics the keywords which drove organic traffic to a page and then to a conversion. So you don't even have that anymore, and because you're then competing with panels and knowledge panels and ads and this and that in the search results pages, it's unless you can track it, you don't know it's even there sometimes. And by tracking it, there are lots of rank trackers out there that say this page has a SERP feature, this page you own the SERP feature, etc. But again, knowing where that actually sits at that point in time on a page can mean the difference between putting money into paid search, putting money into shopping, or not, depending on what's there. Equally, owning and very recently owning the knowledge panel answer box now means that you don't own the position 1 search result. So it can be, depending on the page, actually not that beneficial for you to have that SERP feature. If you're lower down the page, it might be beneficial for you to have that SERP feature, but owning it and not owning it is all you can get in most tools, and that's why we built SERPsketch, basically to try and help integrate all of this stuff so that you can not only know what you own in terms of the sort of the real estate on a page, but you also know what other people are owning and whether or not that's an opportunity for you. Because there is just so much, you get kind of decision fatigue, data fatigue. There's too much to make decent decisions unless you then have something which you can then output into something relatively sensible that helps you make those informed decisions by sort of filtering out all the noise.
So in when I was doing SEO many years ago, it was about page position. Was are you above the fold of page one?
Mm.
That sort of thing.
Yeah,
And I still see now that page position varies day by day, almost, or week by week.
minute by minute, I'm afraid.
So is that a reasonable metric to be using, or has that gone by the wayside now?
Well, the thing is, everyone kind of says, I want to rank in number 1, right?
Absolutely.
And you want to rank number 1 for whatever it is that you specifically know is either your the shortest tail, highest volume keyword that is the thing that sells your product or service.
Hmm.
The trouble is, if you're if you're competing against 4 Google ads, all with some ad extensions, you might be competing for a product with shopping product listing ads. You might then also be competing with people also asked questions, all sorts of different things. That position 1 is sometimes now below the fold. So it's not necessarily about position 1, if that makes sense. So
Yep.
from a client's perspective, if the conversation is always kind of chasing after position 1, and you're able to show where position 1 really is, and that actually going after the knowledge panel result is actually going to be more beneficial, or putting some money into ads at certain points in the day is going to be more beneficial, then that kind of makes sense to be able to visualize that. It does genuinely change minute by minute. So if we were looking at the search results pages for flower delivery, for example, and as you'd expect, certain points in the day are the times when people are more likely to be looking for flowers to be delivered. So, first thing in the morning to be delivered in the afternoon, or in the afternoon for the next morning.
Yep.
So that's when most people are putting money into ads. When the ads aren't showing, then there's the local map pack, which shows, I think, about 5 or 6 different local florists which deliver. So position 1 is really, really nice and highly coveted, but almost half of the day, position 1 is below the fold. So it's actually worth maybe bidding on some ads for those busy periods of the day where you're not going to get seen. It's quite amazing at the minute.
So what metrics would you say is a better view of the success of your SEO, and how many metrics are there?
It depends.
I knew you were going to say that.
um, I try and drum this into everyone that I work with, and it's kind of know your numbers, and you shouldn't have lots of numbers. It should be what's the key thing that you need to know has been a success. So is it sales, for example? So conversions, and then therefore revenue, and then therefore conversion rate are sort of the key if you're selling a product. But those tell you whether something's been a success after it's been measured, right?
Correct.
So you should have something along the way as a leading goal or a leading measure that tells you that your efforts that you're putting in right now are likely to yield that success, and whether there's a delta between them and you need to work harder, or you're going to overshoot your goal in a massive way. So it really does depend on what you're trying to achieve in terms of what metrics you should look at. But with, for example, Google Analytics and Search Console, if you blend that in the right way with a rank tracking tool, and then the exported data from SERPsketch, you can in effect get around the keyword not being provided problem in Google Analytics by knowing where you sit at a given point, whether it drove traffic, how much traffic it drove, and whether or not that page had a conversion. If you're selling something through your site, then knowing where you are and knowing whether or not you're on the way to making the goal of whatever it is that you've set is vital.
That kind of answers it ish, I would say.
Yeah.
And I know you're it depends phrase is going to be coming out of this a couple more times, I'm sure, by the time we get to the end of all these questions. But it seems like if you're new into SEO, you're looking for quick indices of what success you are. And you mentioned it just now with regard to doing that, and you're saying know your numbers. But what numbers do you need to know?
Yeah.
And is there a kind of is there a de facto kind of list that says for a small business, B2B, these are the numbers you should be looking at. For an e-commerce retailer, these are the numbers you should be looking at. Now, and again, those are leading indicator numbers as opposed to conversion numbers, because I know conversion numbers are often seen higher up the food chain.
Yes, yeah, and they're usually the ones that it's too late at that point, whether you've done well or not. You have to report them.
Yes.
If you're looking at, for example, your SEO in a box, as it were.
That's a good phrase.
These are your out of the box. These are the things you should be tracking, and it really is important that the right research is done in advance so that you're actually looking at these things properly. But a good keyword list that you know suits your audience and where those keywords are positioned is quite vital. So using a rank tracking tool that you put those keywords in and you can see when you're starting out you're in position 100, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you see those positions increasing, then the efforts that you're making are having an impact. Based off of that, then you need to know what the click-through rate from the search results are for those keywords, and you'd use something like Search Console. So you then know that this keyword, which you genuinely know is important to your business, is improving in visibility and also has a click-through rate which is relatively good. You then know that you're likely to get the user in. And then understanding the behavior metrics on your site, and again similar to how you guys work. You want to know how people are behaving in order to then make the most out of that user's time on the site. So if you're again out of the box, you can use Google Analytics and look at the time on the site, how many pages are viewed per session, and again knowing your business is really important here. So if you're looking at time on site, if it's a low amount of time on a site, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because it might be a brochureware site, for example, where you're just trying to get someone to pick up the phone. If your time on site's 30 seconds and the phone rings all the time, that's pretty good. If your time on site is 45 minutes and you've got tens and tens of pages and lots of good information, then that's probably good. So deciding what good is a different conversation to what to measure. So time on site is quite a good one.
Sorry to interrupt. Is time on site something that's taken into the Google algorithm?
I'm not going to get into that.
I was expecting it depends, actually, but that's good.
I don't know. I'd like to think that behavior metrics are included in some way or another, but the trouble is, if you use a benchmark for behavior, and you're then using that as a yardstick, you measure very different industries and very different websites with, it almost becomes impossible to say whether it's a good or a bad thing.
Okay.
So, Google doesn't know that that you've got, well, it knows you have 10 pages on your site, but it doesn't know that you only want people to pick up the phone. So time on site being 30 seconds might be good, but you might be penalized for it against a site in the similar niche, which has tens and tens of pages, which wants you to fill in a form or interact with them in some other way. So it feels like a nice thing to say, yes, it would be a good behavior metric to incorporate into a ranking system, but also you can't measure apples with oranges.
Okay. But does time on site and one of the other metrics was the
pages per session?
Yeah, pages per session. There's a number of metrics that you can measure from your Google Analytics, which will give you this is good. One of the things that there was a big drive, and I think it still is a big drive, is to have consumable content in video now.
Yeah.
And does that really make a difference with regard to how Google sees you?
I don't think it does in that sense, in the sense that you'll get a kind of ranking boost, should we say. But if your video that is on your site is hosted on YouTube, then they'll know that it's had a certain amount of views from a website over a certain amount of time. So, from a position of, has this satisfied the user's needs, and you've got a 10-minute long video and the average view time is 34 seconds, even YouTube's algorithm would know that doesn't satisfy people as much as a similarly titled and categorized video, which has much better watch time and repeats. So in that way, that is a nice measure of behavior. But again, I would imagine that that's hard to incorporate into any kind of ranking for the website, primarily because not every business can either afford to or wants to have video that then they host on their site, because it might just not be what they use to sell. It does work, as you know, tens of studies, hundreds of studies have sort of shown video converts really well, and that's why TikTok exists, and that's why
Hmm.
Facebook incorporate video all the time, and YouTube, the second largest search engine on the planet. But it doesn't mean that it suits everybody. So it does make sense. You look at it, and because if you're hosting a video that you own on YouTube through YouTube, you can see, if you set it up properly, those views and view times and things in Google Analytics. So you can then look at that as one of your SEO in a box starter things to know whether or not someone's actually enjoying or digesting your content fully.
You mentioned earlier on that it's one of your hats that you wear. You're also involved in PPC as well as
Yeah.
SEO. So, if you had a marketing budget of say £20,000, and it depends question I know I'm going to
Mm.
ask. What percentage of the budget would you expect a marketer to attribute to each one?
Yeah. It does depend, but I'm firmly in the camp that SEO is effectively like buying the house. You build the authority and you earn your spot. It doesn't mean you keep it forever because you need to maintain your house. But PPC is like renting your house. As soon as you stop, you're gone. As soon as you stop paying your rent, you're gone. So if you had £20,000 and the business was brand new, I'd probably put that into SEO for a long term goal, because that growth is something which will be built on and on over time. If you spend £20,000 on PPC, then once it's gone, and you then have not necessarily worked on SEO at all, and you don't have any authority or any visibility per se to generate more business once that £20,000 in paid has been spent.
If you kind of think of how a marketer should concentrate on the full marketing mix, we've
Mm.
talked about it being a leading indicator, using SEO as a leading indicator. Do you think that there is so much to do that there's not just the data fatigue, but there's also a blindness in being able to understand when Google changes the algorithm to be able to look at it with fresh eyes again? Because it seems like whilst they're not reinventing the wheel, they're obviously changing the tires very frequently.
Yeah, I think that I can't remember how what the number is, but there's hundreds, if not more than 1,000 changes they make in a year. They make maybe once a quarter. There's like an update to the core part of the algorithm which generally has lots of sort of major shifts. But it's I get the question. It's very hard for when you're looking at you shouldn't just look at SEO in silo. And a lot of the time, the trouble is you have your SEO agency, your social media agency, your in-house team, and all that sort of stuff. And it with all of the changes that happen, like you say, you do get this kind of blindness to things because you're working on one thing and you're not looking in the other direction, and someone else is working on another thing. You can completely miss the mark sometimes, and it's often then too late because you can't undo the change that Google made or fix the mistake quickly enough, that you could have probably spotted had there not been so many other things going on at the same time.
Obviously, we can look back at the last 5 or 10 years of SEO and how it's morphed into what it is today. Where do you think that that's going to go in the next, say, 2 to 5 years?
The With Google having a hand in everything, should we say, in terms of the amount of data that they collect and the amount of things that they know about you and me and everyone else, I suspect that, and this is me with my sort of futurism hat on rather than SEO necessarily, the chances are that how at the minute you might look at your the news feed in Google on your phone. It gets
Hmm.
more and more to the point where you start seeing things that you read more frequently, that you're more interested in, and it feels like you're having a good experience, but you forget that those things are there because the search engine knows that you like those things. So in and I might be 100% off the mark here. I do feel that one day you might wake up in the morning and it says Good morning, John. Here's a link to the BMW garage. There's a brand new model BMW which is ideal for you and the family. It's got great mileage per gallon. It's really well put together. Blah blah blah. It doesn't really need to be sold because you really want this car. By the way, you'll be approved for finance, and you can easily get part exchange with this third party, which we have a deal with already. Press OK if you want the car. Obviously, that's a big expense, but think of it on other scales as well. You wake up and you've added to your shopping list on your phone all of the things you want. It says you've ordered all these things. Are you making lasagna tonight because you forgot to put lasagna sheets on the menu? There's going to be a lot of kind of the assistant style stuff will be a lot more mature in the next few years, to the point where you don't really realize that you're not having to think for a lot of stuff.
That raises a kind of a whole other question, obviously, which is the political angle and being able to read only what you're interested in and never see any opposing opinions to what you're able to see. I think SEO is, if you like, an element of being able to provide people to see what you think they need to see, but I think the flip side of being able to manipulate results on SERP pages and extend it to Facebook and Twitter, etc., just seems like I won't say at the start of the slippery slope, we're already on the slippery slope.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any way that, and I know this is I suppose a personal kind of question, do you feel there's any way that slippery slope can be abated?
Honestly, probably not. In the old days of SEO, people were algorithm manipulators to get their clients' websites to the top of the page. Now, because things change so much and because there's so much to look at, everyone is kind of an algorithm chaser, and because of that, you then get into this self-fulfilling prophecy, really, where you're giving it all the data that it's asking for in order to get the rankings that you're being paid to get, and then you're then feeding it this information, which it's then going to effectively use against you, not you personally, but against that industry. SEO's gotten harder and harder and harder, and people have worked harder and harder and harder and got smarter and smarter and smarter. But the search results and actual SEO in of itself hasn't become more of a reward. It's not the search engine. Google hasn't said, cheers for all the data. Here's some cool stuff for you. It says, here, cheers for all the data. We're now launching our own flight comparison engine.
Yep.
So people were up in SEO were up in arms around that, and then the same with the job listings. People were told, year or two ago, add this markup to your job listings, and everything will be okay. I promise. You'll get better rankings for job listings that you've got on your recruitment sites and things. And then a year or so later, they launch a job finder tool. So, everyone's going, oh my God, I can't believe they've done this. And it's a slippery slope because everyone does it the next time round. So it's one thing after another, really.
So I just want to before we finish, I just want to bring round back to some SEO. If we're trying to be able to say, okay, let's design the perfect landing page for your content, which of two variants do you think make the most difference on a landing page? Is it, as we used to say in the old days, AIDA, the attention, interest, desire, and action model that's there? Or do you think psychology now says actually people are much more involved in a quick return on their click? What am I looking for? Is it saying that in the first 10 words? And if it's not, I'll just bounce off.
I think that is, that's a really good question. Certainly got my brain going. I suspect that depending on who you are, So say you're on a desktop or a laptop, then the former makes more sense, the Ada approach, because you're dedicating more time to something because you've got more to see. So you're not necessarily in as much of a hurry as you might be whilst you're on your mobile, for example. And on a
Hmm.
mobile, you've got, I mean, up till relatively recently, before data was as available, you'd have a limited amount of data and a limited amount of attention span and a limited amount of screen size. So you would want the answer right there and then, and if you didn't see it, you'd find something else. Whereas if you have got your laptop or your desktop or your tablet out, you're more likely to be really spending time and invest that time in researching whatever product or service it might be. So then you probably would read more content and probably try and understand what it is that is being provided.
So when you're talking about SERP pages and seeing SERP pages on a mobile versus a desktop,
Mm.
are you saying that SERP pages on a desktop are more considered?
I mean, there's definitely a lot more there. If you look on the desktop, you often have there's a lot more real estate, isn't there? So
Yes.
they'll run several different panels, more sometimes than on mobile. But on mobile, you typically get that knowledge panel answer result or something that gives you the answer in front of you, and that's it. You're almost getting 0 clicks at that point. So you've typed your query in, and Google has stolen your content and put it on the first page at the very top, and you don't need to read any more in order to understand the answer to the question. It's almost like, I mean, that's how people have been cheating in pub quizzes for the last few years, isn't it? Because there's no page history at that point. Um, so yeah, I'd say on mobile you're more likely to there's definitely a limited attention span and a desire to solve your problem immediately, and the search result pages reflect that, I think. On desktop, because there's a lot more and you're more likely to be spending more time on something, you've got all of the search results that you can more or less see above the fold, sometimes obviously below, depending on what it is. You've got a lot more detail in the map pack. You've got a lot more detail in the people also asked section. Sometimes more shop listings. You see who they're from, things like that. There's a lot more detail in there.
Okay, well, it's been, as I said at the beginning, it's going to be an interesting conversation, and that it has. And, I'll let you off with it depends, because I think you're absolutely right. It does depend on what we're trying to do. But thank you very much for the time that you've extended. It's been really, really interesting. I think from my perspective, I've learned a little bit from it, but it's very interesting how we can learn a lot of detail out of SEO, PPC, analytics, and things like that. But it does seem as though we're going to have to dedicate more time to the analytics of that data to get even better results.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Chris, thanks for your time. Hopefully, we'll speak to you soon.
Yes, thanks very much, John.